Supreme Court reaction. What the White House told us about a case centered on religious freedom. Voting bill. Lawmakers on Capitol Hill spar over plans to control what happens at the ballot box. And USCCB statement. How the shepherds of the church emphasize their commitment to communion. On EWTN News Nightly for Tuesday, June 22nd, 2021. Thank you so much for being with us tonight. I'm Tracy Sable. The White House issues a written response to the recent Supreme Court case, Fulton versus the city of Philadelphia. It was a unanimous 9-0 ruling and a victory for religious freedom and Catholic social services. However, it took some questioning in the briefing room to get the official White House response on record. White House correspondent Owen Jensen reports. Owen?
Tracy, good evening to you. The case boiled down to this. Catholic social services refused to certify same-sex couples as foster parents because of their belief on marriage. Well, the city sued and last week lost. Now, yesterday in the press briefing room, I asked the White House for a response, and here's what they said.
White House reaction on the Supreme Court decision to Fulton versus the City of Philadelphia. Does the White House have a reaction on that case?
I think we have issued a reaction to it. I don't have anything more to it. Go ahead. I think we got to move on. Go ahead go ahead right there.
Later, another reporter pointed out he had not seen a White House statement on the Fulton case either, to which the White House replied,
I thought we had. If not, I will get that to you and to this gentleman over here. Thanks, everyone, so much. We'll do this again tomorrow. Okay.
After following up with the White House press office, they later issued a response to EWTN News Nightly, writing, "Since day one, the Biden-Harris administration has been committed to fighting for full equality for LGBTQ plus families, and we intend to make good on that commitment. It's possible to comply with the Fulton decision while taking a strong stand against discrimination." While Philadelphia's Archbishop called the Supreme Court's ruling a crystal clear affirmation of First Amendment rights for the Archdiocese of Philadelphia. Meanwhile, today President Joe Biden meets with leaders from FEMA, the Federal Emergency Management Agency, talking violent weather and being prepared for whatever happens. Just the other day, a tornado slammed into the heavily populated Chicago suburbs.
And extreme weather doesn't confine itself, as you all know, to state lines. These crises require proactive federal response.
And on the COVID front, President Biden's goal of getting 70% of all U.S. adults with at least one jab in the arm by the 4th of July may fall short. The focus now, 18 to 26-year-olds. They are least likely to get a vaccine.
We are asking all young people to have conversations with friends and family members, encouraging their communities to get vaccinated.
The COVID-19 response team also says more than 150 million Americans are now fully vaccinated. They also say 75% of U.S. adults 40 and over have received at least one shot. At the White House, Owen Jensen, EWTN News Nightly.
Senate Democrats are moving ahead with a vote on their sprawling elections and voting reform bill known as For the People Act. But is this house of cards on the verge of collapsing after Senate Republicans vow to block it? Capitol Hill correspondent Eric Rosales reports. Eric?
Democrats tell me even if For the People Act fails tonight, it's the chance to showcase to the American people a unified front within the party and a chance to show the difference between Republicans and Democrats when it comes to voting access.
Republican state legislatures across the country are passing the most draconian voting restrictions since the beginning of Jim Crow, potentially disenfranchising tens of millions of Americans. Congress must take action to defend our democracy.
Negotiations over the bill come as 14 states have already enacted nearly 24 new laws affecting voting this year, according to the Brennan Center for Justice at New York University. Republicans call the bill a federal takeover of elections.
The core desire they have is to federalize all elections to try to achieve a benefit for the Democrats at the expense of the Republicans. Not surprisingly, there will not be a single Republican who supports it.
Whether it's having taxpayers pay for federal elections, or whether it's politicizing the FEC, or whether it's codifying ballot harvesting or doing away with voter ID, This is a piece of legislation that needs to die and die quickly.
All eyes are on moderate Senator Joe Manchin, who says he could support parts of the bill, such as making Election Day a public holiday, expanding early voting to at least 15 consecutive days, and banning partisan gerrymandering. But in return, he wants to require identification to vote. If this bill does fail, Senator Durbin tells me he's not sure what is next.
I do know how the Senate operates, and it is sometimes difficult to achieve your goals, and the first requirement to be a senator is patience.
Some Democrats have expressed to me if the bill fails, it could be used as another example for the need for filibuster reform. But Republicans say the filibuster is what gives the minority party a voice. At the Capitol, Eric Rosales, EWTN News Nightly.
Joining us now is Ken Cuccinelli, chairman of the Election Transparency Initiative and former Virginia Attorney General. Ken, welcome back. Great to see you. As we just heard, all eyes are on West Virginia Democrat Joe Manchin right now. What do you think of his proposed changes to the voting rights bill, and how do you think this will all play out?
Federal takeover. It is literally intended to displace states and have a one-size-fits-all federal approach to elections. And so many of the troublesome practices that we saw in various places in 2020, they're seeking to codify, like ballot harvesting, like not allowing confirmation of who is in front of the election official to vote, same-day registration, so many problems where they are building in an easy system to cheat where it's hard to prove. We want it easy to vote and hard to cheat. They appear to want it to be easy to cheat and hard to prove. But I do expect Senator Manchin, with his relatively small number of concessions that he got, to agree to the bill, which will make it 50-50, though procedurally I'm not sure they'll even get to the bill today because it will be filibustered, as you heard from Senator McConnell, because of has been a product of the radical left for a number of years. This didn't just happen this year. Chuck Schumer is trying to suggest that it's just a response to reform efforts in the states, but that is not true, patently untrue. This has been around for a number of years.
Well, just yesterday, Monmouth University released a poll that found 80% of people surveyed are in favor of showing some form of identification in order to vote. When it came to voting by mail, 50% of those surveyed said they supported making it easier. Let's talk a little bit more about these results, and how do you think that plays into the debate?
Well, you know, because, for instance, I've been trying to debate someone on the left on the subject, and they won't do it because they have a hard time with the facts, and you just laid some out. The results in a Monmouth poll with 80% support for voter ID are not unique. They have been that way for months and months and months. And when you divorce the elements of big over a very commonsensical approach, and there's actually a lot of unity among the American people. Biden voters themselves, black voters, Hispanic voters as well, all overwhelmingly support voter ID, just to use the simplest example. It's when it gets into the political arena that there's so many problems. And as you heard Senator McConnell and others just rattle off example after example of the bad provisions of this bill that really do make it ridiculously easy to cheat. And you have to ask yourself, why would someone put in a bill they cheat? And hard to draw any other conclusion at this point. And that's not something that we can let go by quietly and without a fight. We need to preserve our elections and improve them, not undermine them.
Well, switching gears, we have about a minute left or so. Tomorrow, President Biden is expected to address the spike in crime and gun violence that many cities across the U.S. have been experiencing, and will also present his administration's plan to combat it. What are you hoping to hear from him, and what do you think needs to be done?
Criminals. And we'll know this administration is serious when they start deporting criminal aliens, people they have in their custody who've committed violent crimes, who are here illegally, who they can easily remove from the country. When they start doing that, we'll know they're serious about fighting crime. They need to get back in the business of supporting law enforcement instead of undermining law enforcement. You cannot undermine law enforcement and expect crime to go down. There are some on the left actually blaming the police for the spike in crime, which is ludicrous, as police of the and the lack of support they're getting all over the country.
Well, Ken, thank you so much for your time today. We really appreciate it. Ken Cuccinelli, chairman of the Election Transparency Initiative and former Virginia Attorney General. Thank you again.
Good to be with you.
The president of the U.S. Bishops' Conference says the draft document on the Eucharist seeks to deepen our amazement at being offered the body and blood of Christ. Speaking yesterday, Archbishop Jose Gomez said the goal of the initiative is to remind people that Holy Communion is a, quote, divine gift. The head of the Archdiocese of Los Angeles also asked the faithful to pray for the bishops as they draft the document. Beginning today, the USCCB invites the faithful to pray during Religious Freedom Week. Specific intentions include for the suffering church globally and for protection from church vandals. Religious Freedom Week ends June 29th. The Holy See is formally expressing concern about a proposed law in Italy's legislature that could inhibit religious freedom. A Vatican bishop has said the so-called anti-homophobia law violates religious rights guaranteed to the Catholic Church in Italy. Russia's president honors the 80th anniversary of Nazi Germany's invasion during the Second World War. Vladimir Putin laid flowers at the tomb of the unknown soldier near the Kremlin. Russia's leader was joined by World War II veterans. He says the country will never forget those who gave life and peace to future generations. Hong Kong's leader says the recent crackdown against the Apple Daily is not an attack against journalism. Carrie Lam dismisses international criticism of recent police actions, which have nearly closed the pro-democracy newspaper. Lam specifically chided the U.S. for its advocacy on behalf of Apple Daily, whose acts, she said, endangered China's national security. Coming up, International Affairs. The director of outreach for Aid to the Church in Need tells us about the situation in Ethiopia. And the Holy Father offers a message to grandparents, what he wants you to know. A group that supports Christians around the world is warning of a possible genocide for the faithful in Ethiopia. Aid to the Church in Need says it is concerned about the Tigray region and in particular reports of famine, indiscriminate killings and widespread sexual violence. Earlier this month, Pope Francis called on humanitarian aid, including food, to be sent to Tigray in the northern part of the country. Joining us now is Edward Clancy, Director of Outreach for Aid to the Church in Need. Edward, welcome back. Great to see you. So tell us about the Christians in Tigray and what you're hearing about the situation for them.
Well, the situation is dire. Christians in Tigray are in a very difficult situation. Currently, there are an estimated 3.5 million people displaced. Tigray is an area of northern Ethiopia and southern Eritrea. And the Tigrayans are about 96% Christian, and they are very devout people. And unfortunately, at this time, they're in the middle of a conflict between a couple of different groups. And unfortunately, the poor and the children are suffering greatly.
And for those who aren't familiar, can you tell us a little bit about Christianity in Ethiopia? It's a very historic place for Christians.
Yes. I mean, if we read our Bibles, the New Testament talks about the Ethiopian eunuch. And so the Ethiopia is the kingdom or the country that first adopted Christianity. So it predates even the Armenian, adoption of Christianity. And there's a long history of Christianity in Ethiopia, and they are very devout people. Currently, 65% of the population, so about 70 million people in Ethiopia, are Christian. About half of those are Ethiopian Orthodox. About the other half is a mixture of other Christian denominations. And as I said before, they're very devout. They make Christianity a deep part of their faith and their culture.
As the Holy Father, as we mentioned, he called on humanitarian aid to be delivered to the region. Can you also update us on that and if any aid has been sent to Ethiopia?
Yes, aid has been sent. The problem is it's not getting everywhere it needs to go. Currently, there are at least 350,000 people that are in Category 5 of food deprivation. In other words, they're in severe famine conditions. The estimate is that as many as 300,000 children could die this year. 3.1 million people currently are, in a week of no food. And something like 17.1 million people are within, one season of being in that same situation. So it's a very difficult situation, and it's something we can't look past.
The country continues to tally votes from its parliamentary election. Can you talk to us about that election and how it may impact the country and specifically the people in Tigray?
Well, it'll have a great impact because the federal government in Ethiopia needs to do something, especially with Eritrea at the north. The elections, in fact, the current prime minister is claiming that there is no food problem or no starvation in the north, and there is. So it's important that whoever wins this election, that the issue is addressed, and it will need some diplomatic pressures from the outside to make sure that it's not looked past.
And I'm sure a lot of people watching right now are wondering how they can help the people in Ethiopia. If they would like to help, Edward, where can they get more information?
Well, if you go to our website, you'll see at churchinneed.org information on what is happening or the situation. Unfortunately, right now, the only way to really get aid in is through government agencies. The religious communities are kind of sitting on the side assisting. They're doing vital assistance, but we're not able to get food aid in. What we support is having the people on the ground to make sure that the people who need it get it.
Well, Edward, thank you so much for your time today. Thank you for talking to us about this and also for what you do. Edward Clancy, Director of Outreach for the Aid to the Church in Need. Thank you again.
You're very welcome. Thank you, and God bless you.
Up next, in his own words, an author describes a biblical walk through the Mass. Well, this year marks the 10th anniversary of one of the most important books on the history of the Catholic Mass. In 2011, Dr. Edward Shree wrote a biblical walk through Mass. 10 years later, a new edition is available. The book explores the biblical roots and the liturgy and reveals what it means and why it is so important. Joining us from Rome is Dr. Edward Shree, theologian and author of the 10th anniversary edition of A Biblical Walk Through the Mass. Dr. Shree, thank you so much for joining us. And as I mentioned, you're in Rome. Tell us why you're there.
Oh, it's so exciting. Rome is open again. I'm so thrilled to be able to lead pilgrimages again to this awesome city. So I'm here with my wife, my daughter, a bunch of missionaries from Focus and others leading a pilgrimage here this week. And it's just been amazing. Everything's open, being able to walk through the basilicas, the museums, the beautiful churches, and not having to compete with all the large crowds of tourists like normal. It's been an incredible, blessed, very prayerful experience of Rome, perhaps like never before.
Well, that is so wonderful here. I want to get back to the book now. Tell us why you wrote the book 10 years ago, and in some ways, it seems it's more relevant now than it was back then in 2011.
Yeah, a biblical walk through the Mass. I wanted to really, way back then, be able to help the average layperson that goes to Mass. They go every Sunday, they go on the holy days, maybe they go during the week, but to really understand what is it that we're really saying and we're doing in the liturgy. So many of us, we feel like we just go through the motions sometimes. Even though we're very devout, we believe in the Eucharist, we stand up, we sit down, we say, thanks be to God, alleluia. But we can go halfway through Mass and go, oh, my mind was wandering. I wasn't paying attention. And I think we can actually experience the liturgy and encounter Jesus more profoundly if we really understood what we're saying and what we're doing in the liturgy. And so what the book does is it unpacks all of the prayers and rituals and symbols, and it draws from the scriptures, because all of those prayers and rituals come from the Bible. They weren't just made up a long time ago by Catholic leaders. They come from Scripture. And if we can understand the biblical background of all the beautiful prayers and the rituals of the Mass, we'll be able to give our hearts more to Christ and experience His love more in every Mass.
Yeah, and as you know, churches are reopening following the pandemic, which we're really happy about. Talk to us why it's so important to attend Mass in person if you can do so, as opposed to, virtually.
That's why I think this book is so timely right now, as churches are starting to open up around the United States and in different parts of the world. And I know different churches have different experiences, but we're all starting to go in the right direction. And I think as people are starting to come back together again, it's important that we remember why we're coming together. It's not just for the fellowship, it's ultimately for the worship of God. And that's something you can't just do on your own and on a screen, because the perfect worship of God, the one that Jesus invites us into, is His very loving sacrifice on the cross made present to us at every Mass. The Mass is called the sacrifice of the Mass for a reason, because Jesus' sacrifice on Good Friday is made present to us so that we can enter into it and give our hearts, our lives totally in love to the Father through Christ's sacrifice in the Mass. I can't just do that in my living room or in a park. I need to participate in the Holy Liturgy. But it doesn't stop there. The greatest part of the Mass is being able to receive Jesus in a Holy Communion, His very body, blood, soul, and divinity. And while I was moved by so many Catholics during the pandemic growing in their devotion to spiritual communions, we all know that pales in comparison to the actual real Holy Communion that takes place when we receive Him, His very body and blood, in the Eucharist.
Yeah, and speaking of the Eucharist, as you know, there's been a lot of discussion on the Eucharist lately. Let's talk a little bit more about that Holy Communion, what it is, why church leaders call it, quote, a divine gift. What can you tell us?
Yeah, I think this Holy Communion, this is the most intimate union that we can have with our God. I mean, I can pray to God at home. I can pray to God with the Scriptures, pray to God in fellowship with my friends in a Bible study. But when I actually go to Mass and I receive Jesus in Holy Communion, this is our God. This is under the appearance of bread and wine. Jesus is coming to us for the most profound union that we could possibly have. One of the things I talk about in the book is how when the priest holds up the host right before we receive communion and he says, "Blessed are those who are called to the supper of the Lamb." What he's doing is he's echoing the words from Revelation chapter 19, verse 9, which is all about the wedding supper of the Lamb, this great wedding feast in heaven where it's Jesus, the bridegroom, coming to unite himself to his bride, the church. And what it's reminding us when the priest holds up the host and says those words from Revelation 19:9, it's reminding us that when we are going to Mass, we're getting a wedding invitation at that moment. And we're no ordinary guest at this wedding feast. It's like we're the bride. So when we come up the aisle to receive Holy Communion, it's like here comes the bride. We're the bride, and we're about to encounter our bridegroom in the most intimate way possible as he enters into our souls in this profound way in Holy Communion. This is the great gift that Jesus gave us right before he died at the Last Supper, and that's why it's so important that we return to Mass. We go and receive him in Holy Eucharist so that we can be one with him.
Well, thank you so much for joining us today. We really appreciate it. And God bless you, Dr. Edward Shree, theologian and author of the 10th anniversary edition of A Biblical Walk Through the Mass. Thank you again.
Thanks for having me. God bless.
And copies of the 10th anniversary edition of A Biblical Walk Through the Mass are available at ascensionpress.com. Well, finally tonight, Pope Francis reminds the faithful of the importance of grandparents.
Tutta la Chiesa ti è vicina, diciamo meglio, ci è vicina. Si preoccupa di te.
In a video message, the Holy Father says there is no retirement age for sharing the faith, and he adds the Church needs the prayers from the elderly in the same way people need to breathe, because grandparents are able to pass on the faith to younger generations. His remarks came as part of the first World Day of Grandparents and the Elderly. We thank you for watching tonight. For the entire EWTN News Nightly team, I'm Tracy Sable. Good night and God bless.